the angels, the sons of God, resemble who we call in ufology the Nordics or the Pleiadians, who are these beings who very much look like us. The misconception is that the fallen angels have a different appearance than the good angels. The bad guys look different than the good guys. The good guys are these beautiful angelic beings, and the fallen angels are these grotesque, demonic-looking entities with horns, and they're the typical Hollywood depictions of demons. But that's ludicrous. That is completely illogical. These entities, these beings, hail from the same race.
What? Lucifer is an angel, a fallen angel.
My name is Timothy Albrino, and you are watching End Times Productions.
Earth angel.
Angel?
Yeah?
An angel. Made again.
I seen the angel of death.
So what you saying? You looking at some big black angel got sit down here to snatch your hunky ass out of there at the last possible minute?
The angel called us God's hands.
So we're like superheroes?
Every time that human beings encounter angelic beings within the biblical narrative, the description of the angels is always the same. They look like men. Indeed, Paul says that it's possible to entertain angels unawares, which means that you can confuse them for human beings. They're not human beings. They are, in fact, an extraterrestrial, non-human race, a pre-existent extraterrestrial, non-human race. But they are also sons of God, just like Adam was a son of God. And so it makes sense, therefore, that all the sons in the family bear the same semblance. They look the same, and they resemble their father. And it is my contention that both mankind and the elder race, the human race and the elder race, bear the image of God. There is no scripture in the Bible anywhere that states that mankind is the exclusive bearer of God's image. Rather, it just says that we were made in the image and likeness of the Elohim. And so we look like them because they are our elder siblings. We are reproductively compatible with them. So we are very similar, even physiologically, although they are of a higher nature. And so then the question is, what do they look like? And I think the answer is apparent within the canonized text of Scripture. They look like us, but with some differences. And we know that there has to be some differences because Lot was able to recognize them when they were approaching the city of Sodom. Lot saw two angels approaching and instantly was able to recognize that these were sons of God, emissaries from the kingdom of heaven. Now, how could he have recognized these angels? Because they looked human enough to where they could pass through town and be taken as exotic human beings, but they had distinctive trademarks, hallmarks, that were calling cards that they were not human beings and that they were indeed angels, that Lot recognized these hallmarks. And it also explains why the men of Sodom were so attracted to these exotic men who had entered the city. And I would imagine that these angels, when they entered Sodom, that they probably had cloaks on, maybe they were covering their heads and you could only see their faces, but from their faces, from what you could discern on their faces, they probably had blue eyes, fair skin, golden blonde hair, white or golden blonde hair. And oftentimes I get accused of being racist when I describe angels in this way. But what people don't realize is that this is actually the ancient Hebrew perception, conceptualization of what the sons of God look like. When you read the book of Enoch, at the very end of the book of Enoch, there is a fragment inserted into the story from the book of Noah. Now, whether or not the book of Enoch and the book of Noah are true accounts, they are ancient Hebrew accounts. They are part of the Hebrew cosmology. In other words, they are representative of the way that the Hebrews thought and conceptualized the world. And so in these fragments from the book of Noah, again found at the end of the book of Enoch, we have this strange story, this account that is being presumably recorded by Enoch, in which Lamech, the father of Noah, is distressed because his wife has just given birth to Noah. And when Noah came out of the womb, he had fair skin. So according to these fragments from the book of Noah, Lamech's wife was pregnant. And when she gave birth to her son, Noah, Lamech was extremely distressed when he saw this baby. Why? Because the baby resembled a son of God, one of the sons of God. And remember, Lamech, when Noah's born, Lamech is familiar with the sons of God, the watchers who created all this havoc, right? So he sees Noah come through the birth canal and pop out, and he looks like one of the sons of God. And so obviously Lamech is concerned because here he has a son that's coming. How can I say this? I almost feel like just reading it. This is what he says. And it seems to me that he is not sprung from me, but from the angel. Maybe I should just read this. Should I just read this?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, this will just make it, because I think this is an important point. So this is the account from the book of Noah, in the fragments of the book of Noah inserted into the book of Enoch. And after some days, my son Methuselah, this is presumably Enoch writing, and after some days, my son Methuselah took a wife for his son Lamech, and she became pregnant by him, and bore him a son. And his body was white as snow, and red as the blooming of a rose. And the hair of his head and his long locks were white as wool, and his eyes were beautiful, probably meaning that they were distinct from other men's eyes. In other words, they were probably blue or green or something like that. And when he opened his eyes, he lighted up the whole house like the sun, and the whole house was very bright. And thereupon he arose in the hands of the midwife, opened his mouth, and conversed with the Lord of righteousness. And his father Lamech was afraid of him, and fled, and came to his father Methuselah. And he said unto him, I have begotten a strange son, diverse from and unlike man, and resembling the sons of God. And his nature is different, and he is not like us, and his eyes are as the rays of the sun, and his countenance is glorious. And it seems to me that he is not sprung from me, but from the angels. And I fear that in his days a wonder may be brought on the earth. So, whether or not this story is true, is literally true, and it may not be, it still gives us insight into how the ancient Hebrews conceptualized the sons of God. How did they conceptualize the sons of God? Fair skin, bright, probably blue or green eyes or clear eyes, white or blonde hair, basically like Scandinavians. And I contend that this angelic race is probably 6.5 to 7 feet tall because of some other indications elsewhere in extra-biblical texts. And so this is why I say that the angels, the sons of God, resemble what we call in ufology, the Nordics or the Pleiadians, who are these beings who very much look like us, but their physiology have these very same descriptive qualities. They are fair-skinned, they're tall, 6.5, 7 feet tall, they have blonde or golden blonde hair, they have bright blue eyes or bright green eyes. This is not a commentary on race or something like that. This is simply referencing the ancient Hebrew conceptualization of the sons of God. The members of the elder race are represented by both the good guys and the bad guys. There's this misconception among Christians that there's good angels and bad angels. There's the good angels who are still loyal to the Father, and then there's the quote-unquote fallen angels. And the term fallen angel is a bit of a contrivance. It's not actually a biblical term. We all understand what's meant by it. The angels that rebelled and are in a state of insurrection. They're reprobates. They have become the enemies of God, the enemies of the King and of the kingdom of heaven. These are the fallen angels. The misconception is that the fallen angels have a different appearance than the good angels. The bad guys look different than the good guys. The good guys are these beautiful angelic beings, much like the description here from the fragments of Noah. And the fallen angels are these grotesque, demonic-looking entities with horns, and they're the typical Hollywood depictions of demons. But that's ludicrous. That is completely illogical. These entities, these beings, hail from the same race. They're the same race. They probably speak the same language. They have the same knowledge. They most likely are operating the same technology, the same technological implements. Why wouldn't they be? They're from the same race. The fallen angels were at one time good angels, non-fallen angels, if you will. They were loyal to the king until they were disloyal. So they come from the same culture. And I think that word is very appropriate when we talk about the kingdom of heaven. It is a kingdom. It's not this ethereal spiritual concept. It has locality. It is in every way very much like what we are familiar with as it pertains to civilization and culture and society. It has a court. It has a judicial system. It has a standing army. Angels eat and drink. The Israelites ate the bread of heaven. In Psalms it says that they ate the grain of heaven, the sustenance of the angels. So how do you get grain? You harvest wheat. So I think that we are entitled to make these logical extrapolations. If the Israelites are eating the grain of heaven, that means that that grain was processed from some kind of wheat. And I think we can go so far as to say some kind of extraterrestrial wheat that was harvested on somewhere else in the cosmos. So it's a civilization, and they have all the implements of a civilization. And in fact, their civilization, the civilization of the elder race, is the prototype of ours. It preexists ours. Our civilization is a shadow of theirs. In other words, our institutions are based on the institutions that preexisted us. Angels, the kingdom of heaven has a standing army. And this is apparent all over the Old Testament and the New Testament. In fact, one of the most common names, titles of the God of Israel is the Lord of armies, the Lord of hosts. And that word hosts is it's a militaristic term, the Lord of armies. Why do armies exist? To protect the borders of a sovereign realm. Armies don't exist without a civilization.
For centuries, the Genesis 6 affair, which is the prelude to the Great Flood, has been the topic of continual controversy. The story of Noah's Ark is easy enough to comprehend, but the events that precipitated the cataclysm of the flood are shrouded in mystery. The reason for this intentional ambiguity in the biblical narrative is that these events are thoroughly chronicled elsewhere, namely in the book of Enoch, the content of which was undoubtedly well known to the ancient Hebrews. Hence, the writer of Genesis offers only this. Now it came to pass that when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born to them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were beautiful, and took wives for themselves of all whom they chose. Enoch paints a slightly more lurid picture. And it came to pass, when the children of men had multiplied, that in those days were born unto them beautiful and comely daughters. And the angels, the children of heaven, saw and lusted after them, and said to one another, Come, let us choose wives from among the children of men, and beget us children. These verses appeared to have been pasted almost word for word into the Genesis account, which makes perfect sense if the intent of the author was to recall the reader to the testimony of Enoch, wherefrom they were copied. For most of church history, the incident they describe was scrutinized and debated exclusively in the halls of seminaries among budding scholars. But thanks to the internet, Genesis 6:1 has become nearly as famous as John 3:16. Consequently, a panoply of books and documentaries have been published in recent years to capitalize on the growing demand for all things Nephilim. In my opinion, though broadly consumed, the implications of the Genesis 6 affair have been poorly digested. If, having read these verses, the theological furniture in your mind has not been rearranged, then you have simply not understood what is insinuated in the text. That the angels, the children of heaven, could look upon human women and burn with lust for them is a shocking contradiction to the traditional perception of heavenly beings, who are not supposed to be clothed in bodies of flesh. Furthermore, that they deemed themselves reproductively compatible with our species is sufficient to overturn the notion that only we are made in the likeness of God. The meaning of the text is inescapable. The sons of God were sexually attracted to the daughters of men and desired to copulate with them and beget offspring. The sexuality implicit in the Genesis 6 affair is a stumbling block for many theologians who insist that angels are purely spiritual beings without physical bodies, and therefore incapable of lusting after, having sex with, and impregnating human females. Forcefully though the argument is advanced, it will never escape the counter-momentum of its own irrelevance, because that is precisely what they, the angels, did. The problem for theologians is that sensual impulses imply sexual organs and reproductive biology, which, according to convention, angels must not have. In an effort to circumvent this problem, some researchers have suggested that the angels did not themselves have sex with women, but instead possessed the bodies of men in order to perform the act, or alternatively, simply incarnated with male anatomy, which assigns to them magical, metamorphic powers nowhere evidenced in the scriptures. Others postulate that sexual intercourse never actually occurred, and that the procreative procedure was accomplished through some form of genetic engineering. All of these theories, and indeed any that may be devised, fail to address the critical first cause. The children of heaven lusted after the daughters of men. How can spiritual beings, supposedly unequipped for sexual intercourse and incapable of reproduction, be subject to carnal passions and accomplish procreation? Do the sons of God even have seed to sow? Surely the fact that they impregnated women indicates that they do. Proponents of the genetic engineering hypothesis attempt to sidestep this conundrum by suggesting that the angels did not use their own seed to fertilize the ova of human females, but the seed of other creatures modified in vitro. In the first place, this proposition evades the first cause. They wanted to have sex, a desire which would have hardly been satisfied in a petri dish. And in the second place, It dismisses the testimony of Enoch, who leaves no room for doubt as to how they performed the act. It is evident that Enoch, as well as the writer of Genesis, clearly mean to say that the angels lusted after, copulated with, and procreated through human females. The Masoretic rendering of Genesis 6 designates these mutinous angels as sons of God. In the Septuagint, they are called the angels of God, which consequently invalidates the ridiculous Sethite nonsense. However, Hebrew tradition, as well as numerous ancient extra-biblical texts, including the Book of Enoch, denominate them with the Aramaic word irin, rendered in the Greek as egregore, and in the English as watchers. The watcher denomination is not exclusively extra-biblical. The book of Daniel recounts a fascinating incident in which King Nebuchadnezzar is sentenced to an unusual punishment for his excessive pride. He is driven mad and made to live among the beasts of the field and eat grass for 7 years. What makes this story even more intriguing is that Nebuchadnezzar's judgment is decreed by a council of watchers. I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in my bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said thus, "Chop down the tree and lop off its branches. Strip off its leaves and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee from under it, and the birds from its branches. But leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts in the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him. And let 7 periods of time pass over him. The sentence is by the decree of the watchers, the decision by the word of the holy ones, to the end that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will, and sets over it the lowliest of men." This scene recalls us to the counsel of the Elohim, who determined to make man in their likeness and grant him dominion of the earth. The council's decision regarding Nebuchadnezzar is a reiteration of Adam's irrevocable endowment. The authority of human rulers will be upheld, even if they defy heaven. But the council will appoint and depose them as they see fit. Having been thoroughly humbled after 7 years of madness, the king of Babylon obsequiously declares that Yahweh does according to his will among the host of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. All realms, terrestrial and extraterrestrial, are subject to the decree of the king and his council. The identity of the watchers is no great mystery. Much like the term angel, watcher is an occupational descriptive, as in soldier or warrior, or more precisely, warden. That is to say, it does not supply insight into what a being is, but what it does. In Aramaic and Hebrew, as in English, watching can mean guarding, which is the job description of the cherubim, who watch over the throne and kingdom of God with extreme vigilance, and are thus aptly portrayed with many eyes and 4 faces looking in every direction, as if to convey nothing escapes our gaze. Daniel depicts the watchers as members of the divine council and refers to them as holy ones, which is a distinction reserved for the highest-ranking beings who dwell in the presence of God. Clearly, the watchers are synonymous with the cherubim, the princes and wardens of the kingdom, the most esteemed members of the elder race. The methods by which the Watchers accomplish their transgression are not as important as the motives. Why did they do it? Aside from the primal urge for sexual intercourse, they seem to have been consumed with another carnal impulse: envy. The Watchers were envious of mankind. Specifically, there are three things they coveted. 1. Wives. Mankind was granted a special privilege that was not afforded to the sons of God: a female counterpart, a wife. The Watchers envied men for their wives. 2. Offspring. Because men had female counterparts, they could procreate offspring. The Watchers wanted to beget their own children and have families, like the sons of Adam. 3. Dominion. Mankind was given dominion of planet Earth. The Watchers coveted man's dominion and plotted to usurp it by producing their own human hybrid sons. This is perhaps the most important and most overlooked aspect of their transgression. The defection of the Watchers, though provoked by lust, was not entirely impulsive. They had a plan. By copulating with the women of Earth, they could produce their own offspring, who might be human enough to inherit Adam's birthright. The half-breed sons of the Watchers, inexorably superior to their human cousins in every way, would seize the thrones of men and establish their own kingdoms, which their fathers would rule by proxy. We will analyze this situation at length in the next lecture. If you wish to further explore the topics presented in this lecture, I encourage you to get my book, Birthright: The Coming Post-Human Apocalypse and the Usurpation of Adam's Dominion on Planet Earth. In the last episode, we discussed the motivations that led to the fall of the Watchers. Namely, they envied the sons of Adam and lusted after their daughters. These forbidden desires would ultimately culminate in the most devastating catastrophe ever to befall mankind: the Great Flood. But before we get to the flood, we need to examine the events that precipitated it. It is important to note that the general narrative of the Genesis 6 affair, the descent of the gods, their procreation of hybrid offspring with the daughters of men, and the sudden obliteration of their world in a ruinous cataclysm, can be detected in the written records and oral traditions of every primary culture on earth. The ancients referred to the time before the flood, when the gods dwelt among men, as the Golden Age. Countless hours could be devoted to cataloging the parallels in the pre-flood legends of Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Greco-Roman, Mesoamerican, Andean, Polynesian, and Asian peoples, among many others. One of the principal commonalities of Golden Age lore is the positive light in which it is cast. The memory of the old world was enshrined in the minds of the ancients as a utopian paradise in which mankind greatly benefited from intercourse with the gods. There is, however, one glaring exception to the rule: the Hebrew account. The ancient Hebrew conceptualization of the Golden Age could not have been more antithetical to that of its contemporaries. In the Hebrew mind, the old world was a dreadful dystopia marked by extreme violence, unbridled depravity, and open defiance against the ordinances of God. The beings who descended from heaven wrought chaos and corruption on earth, provoking the judgment of the Great Flood. As aforementioned, While the advent of the Golden Age is undoubtedly a major component of ancient Hebrew cosmology, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, has little to say about it because the story was thoroughly chronicled in the book of Enoch, from which the following details are derived. In the days of Jared, the son of Mahalalel and the father of Enoch, a company of 200 watchers defected from the kingdom of heaven and journeyed to the earth, intent on procuring wives for themselves from the daughters of men. The watchers arrived on the summit of Mount Hermon, the highest peak on the east coast of the Mediterranean Sea, straddling the border between Syria and Lebanon. We should resist the temptation to imagine these angelic beings descending from heaven with feathery wings flapping in the wind. As previously noted, except in the context of prophetic iconography, angels are never depicted with wings in the biblical narrative. We do, however, sometimes find them navigating the skies in advanced aerospace vehicles, what Iron Age observers called chariots of fire, or the chariots of God. The biblical writers had to rely on familiar references when attempting to describe visions of extraterrestrial technology. Chariots were the most sophisticated vehicles of conveyance known to them, and as such, provided the most conceivable correlation. Men of that age could not even conceptualize horseless chariots, let alone air and spacecraft, and would have had great difficulty describing the mechanisms that powered them. It is also illogical to assume that the elder race, apparently capable of incredible technological feats, would be utilizing horses and chariots for conveyance, a form of transportation that even man abandoned long ago in favor of more efficient means. We may therefore conclude that the watchers arrived to the summit of Hermon at the helm of advanced aerospace vehicles, which we would today describe as UFOs, and that they likely did so by traversing a wormhole, or Stargate in the sci-fi vernacular. The means by which the watchers arrived may be debated, but what they did next is abundantly clear. After binding themselves by an oath of mutual imprecations, knowing full well that what they were about to do amounted to sedition, the watchers descended into the plains of Lebanon and chose among the inhabitants therein the women they desired to wed. Whether they seduced these women or took them by force is unclear. However, because the wives of the watchers are ultimately implicated in their husband's transgression and judged accordingly, we may infer that they were willing partners. Some researchers speculate that the watchers were reptilian in appearance. This is almost certainly not true. As sons of God, they bore the semblance of strikingly handsome young men, much like the angels who supped with Lot before Sodom's destruction. This would explain the seeming eagerness of the women to wed the watchers. It is hard to imagine a beautiful woman falling head over heels for a reptilian freak. It is interesting that the watchers saw fit to wed these women rather than simply fornicate with them. This procedure reveals that they were after more than sex. Apparently, they intended to procreate families within the covenant of marriage, almost as if they were hoping that the interspecies union might eventually be approved, or at the very least tolerated, by God. Moreover, it appears that marriage to the daughters of men was part of a mutually beneficial transaction. Enoch tells us that the watchers revealed to men the secrets they were striving to learn. These secrets were related to what today we call science and technology. The bargain was simple. In exchange for their daughters' hands in marriage, the watchers would teach the sons of Adam or more precisely, the sons of Cain, the scientific and technological knowledge that they were already striving to learn. The Watchers knew that a hostile takeover of planet Earth would result in swift retribution from the kingdom of heaven, the armies of which defend man's dominion from extraterrestrial assailants. So they devised a plan that would give them legal cover. If the sons of men, the lawful regents of the earth, were willing partners in the scheme, then they might avoid confrontation with the armies of the kingdom. By willfully giving their daughters' hands in marriage, which was probably done with all the ceremonial formality one might expect for such a momentous occasion, the sons of Adam were authorizing the Watchers to freely operate in their realm. They may even have thought that they were getting the better part of the deal, but they could not have hoped to outsmart these ancient and esteemed members of the elder race. It would soon become clear that, like the fabled Mephistopheles, the Watchers had beguiled mankind into a Faustian bargain. The conjugal union of the elder race and the human race resulted in something extraordinary, to say the least. After the Watchers copulated with their brides, the women conceived and gave birth to giants. There's much debate concerning how these women were able to carry to term and deliver gigantic babies, a feat which would have surely proven fatal for both mother and child. According to some traditions, the women's wombs were indeed split open by the massive fetuses, but this scenario is not necessary to make sense of the phenomenon. Just like human babies born today with the genetic disorder of gigantism, the size and weight of the hybrid babies may have been typical at birth, but as the infants progressed through childhood, they experienced accelerated growth, resulting in exceedingly large adults. However, in stark contrast to the genetic disorder of gigantism, which weakens the heart and causes a cascade of debilitating conditions, the giant sons of the Watchers were superhumanly enhanced with the DNA of the elder race. It must have been truly terrifying for those who watched in wonder as the children of the gods grew to colossal size and began to consume all the acquisitions of the land. Enoch records that men were forced to feed the giants, and when they could no longer satisfy their enormous appetites, the giants began to feed on men. This may have been the origin of human sacrifice. The Watchers, who were no doubt venerated as living deities, likely demanded a quota of human flesh to be offered up to their semi-divine sons in an act of reverent devotion. Later, post-Diluvian cultures would remember the sanguinary appetite of the gods and reenact this practice in their temples and sacred places, even feeding their screaming children into the gaping mouths of smoldering idols to be consumed alive in the flames. Unlike the familiar portrayals in Disney cartoons, the giant sons of the Watchers were not stupid brutes. Endowed with the genetic trademarks of their fathers, they would have been truly remarkable beings, both in their physical prowess and their intellectual capacity. It would not have been difficult for them to seize the thrones of every human ruler and build their own kingdoms on earth, which is precisely what I propose that they did. Recall that the Watchers had 3 objectives in mind. They wanted to marry the daughters of men so that they might procreate their own offspring, and through their hybrid progeny, rule the earth by proxy. In other words, the Watchers effectively usurped the terrestrial dominion of mankind through the agency of their hybrid sons, who were human enough to claim the birthright of Adam. It was an ingenious plan, and it worked for a while, until men began to petition heaven for redress of the Watchers' crimes.